but I did some research on the numbers of how many people have lost Bitcoin and how many people, or, let's just say Bitcoin, and how many people have been the victims of fraud or theft. And the delta there is actually quite staggering. It appears you are twice as, or more than twice as likely to just lose your Bitcoin than you are to have, a malicious hacker or, the $5 wrench or whatever, to have it stolen from you.
Welcome to the Bitcoin Basics podcast with your hosts, Faris and Gordon from CoinCompass.com, enabling you to safely buy and securely store your Bitcoins. All resources are in the show notes and description, including our disclaimer. Visit BitcoinBasicsPodcast.com to subscribe and discover other free content.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Bitcoin Basics podcast with your host, Gordon. That's me. I'm flying solo today. No Faris, my partner in crime. And before I introduce today's special guest, let's do our proof recording. The current Bitcoin price, and I'm trying not to get too excited, is $51,490 US. And the current Bitcoin blockchain height or block number is 671,141. So today I interviewed Anthony S. Park, who is a returning guest, and I will link that episode where we talked about estate planning in the description of the show notes. I'll also link his latest podcast from a couple of weeks ago where he discussed Bitcoin risk of theft versus risk of loss. So all of that in the show notes or description in your podcast player or YouTube. Today's podcast episode was really a follow-on from Anthony's initial podcast discussing the likelihood of your Bitcoin being stolen versus the likelihood of your Bitcoin being hacked or from theft or whatnot. And he obviously comes from a legal perspective. I come from a technical perspective, and I think we're on the same page. We may have not agreed with some of the implementation, but hopefully this will give you food for thought in terms of whether, even if you have a small amount of Bitcoin, how is that going to be accounted for in your will, and what are you going to leave for your beneficiaries? So without further ado, here's the interview.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, like, and share so we can find others like yourself.
Okay, so hi, Anthony, for the second time returning guest. I think if you come onto our podcast for 3 times, you get a hat or T-shirt or something.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
Not that we have them, so it's a virtual hat or T-shirt. A few things have happened in the world since we last spoke, but we're not going to go there. 2 things I'm going to do. I'm going to link your recent podcast episode that we're going to talk about today, and also our last interview on the show in the show notes, so people can check that out. But how about you tell us who Anthony S. Park is and perhaps plug yourself as well?
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me on again. It's great talking about this topic. My name is Anthony Park. I'm an attorney and professional executor in New York. And what that means is I'm the person that you hire when you don't have anyone else, or you don't have anyone suitable to sort of settle the final affairs of a loved one, primarily in New York, but actually I've served all over the United States. So that's my bread and butter business, and that's the experience from which I draw when I think about things like, okay, what happens to someone's crypto or Bitcoin when they die? Exactly. I know a lot of people talk about it sort of on a philosophical or academic level, but I'm the one who's kind of in the trenches with my sleeves rolled up, figuring out, okay, where exactly are those phrases? I mean, I haven't had that situation quite yet, but I am quite experienced in how messy it is after someone dies. And I can sort of bring that knowledge and that experience for sort of helping folks flesh out what is a plan that will actually work, when you pass away with regard to your crypto, your Bitcoin.
And you haven't come across any people who have died and, left millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin on the table?
So I'm doing several plans, which is very exciting. I'm having fun helping folks sort of think this through. But as far as I know, I haven't had a probate. That's what they call it when somebody passes away. I haven't had a probate with somebody holding or huddling, at least as far as I know. Maybe they were, and the heirs just didn't know, which is one of the problems, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Plausible deniability. And actually, this is something I don't think we were last episode, and you don't have to go into it. But how did you first come across Bitcoin and buy Bitcoin, if you want to answer it?
I don't remember. I think it. What I think you would call him a thought leader, who I had been following or reading, Naval Ravikant. I'm not sure if you know who that is. He's the founder of AngelList. He's a Silicon Valley angel investor and entrepreneur, but he's also pretty bullish on Bitcoin, both from a financial perspective, but also as a society advancing technology, like, as it were. And he just made it sound super interesting and super positive. So I think that's when I jumped in.
Did you first think it was internet funny money, or you actually thought, no, this is actually something amazing?
So because of the way I was introduced, and I think this was on the Tim Ferriss podcast, and a popular US-based podcast, it wasn't introduced as an investment. It was introduced as decentralization first, and later a potential way of profiting or changing the reserve system. But it was really posited to me first, at least again based on my exposure or my experience, about the problem with gatekeepers, and that really resonated with me before I thought, oh, I can also make some money off this.
Yeah. What did they say? Come for the money and stay for the gains. Stay for something. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, I thought it was Second Life, and I'd be able to buy virtual houses and build golf courses and that kind of stuff. But obviously, I was wrong. So the reason why we've got you on, because I listened to an excellent podcast episode you did, I think last week or perhaps the week before, called Bitcoin Theft versus Loss. Do you want to just give us like a really brief synopsis of what you were talking about?
Sure. So I did some very high level, just Google, I didn't really dig very deep, but I did some research on the numbers of how many people have lost Bitcoin, and how many people, let's just say Bitcoin, and how many people have been the victims of fraud or theft. And the delta there is actually quite staggering. It appears you are twice as, or more than twice as likely to just lose your Bitcoin than you are to have, a malicious hacker or, the $5 wrench or whatever, to have it stolen from you. So there's a couple caveats here. This is, from what I could tell, this data is not, bulletproof. A lot of the Bitcoins that are counted as lost could be simply long-term holders, because I believe they're pulling data from the ledger and basically making a guess as to, okay, this thing has not moved in X number of years. Let's add that into the lost pile. So it doesn't seem like it's that accurate. But even if you knock off a certain percentage of that, it does seem like it's way more than theft. That being said, the amount of Bitcoin that has been stolen may in fact be underreported, as in most walks of life. Not every crime is necessarily reported and documented. So there is some fudging of the numbers there, but it does seem pretty clear that you are more likely, and probably twice as likely, to lose your crypto just by losing your passwords, your seed phrases, etc., than you are to be the victim of a hacker or a SIM swap or what have you.
Yeah, so I'm just quoting from what you said in the podcast, and I think these numbers are grossly underreported. 1.6 million stolen, 3.7 million lost. That's, I mean, if you round that up, that's 6 million, which, given the circulating supply is just over 18 million at the moment, that's a third. Right. That's a third of all Bitcoin. I think that's actually quite underreported. So I think that's an absolute bare minimum. I won't go into how I lost Bitcoin and had coins on Mt. Gox as well, because I'll be crying.
I'm so sorry.
due to the price, but that's another story for another day. So what is more likely then? Let's start with this: losing your Bitcoin or having your Bitcoin stolen?
So the numbers seem to tell the story that you are more likely to lose just by forgetting your passwords or your seed phrases, depending on how you're set up, or when you die. And maybe you knew where everything was, and you knew you had it etched into your memory, but that doesn't help your heirs. I think the Matthew Mellon is one of those examples. So that's one example. I mean, I think that's the biggest story, but just a lot of that's kind of where I come in. Like, sure, there's the story of how are you going to plan for maintaining, preventing catastrophic life for yourself during your lifetime? But what my expertise, I hope, is able to help folks with is how do you prevent that from happening when you sort of have to transfer to your heirs?
Yeah, so don't copy and paste your Bitcoin private keys into a Google Doc or email it to yourself or something like that. So I guess on that, and let's drill down it because your podcast was great. And again, check the links in the show notes because you came up with a lot of problems, but we'll delve into that a little bit more and perhaps come up with some solutions. Sure. But firstly, let's just answer, what does it actually mean to own Bitcoin?
So, I'm not really the expert on this area, but I can put a sort of legal lens on it, or at least an estate lens on it. And you kind of have a couple of different ways of thinking about it, because it's doesn't quite fit neatly into any one bucket. I mean, you might think of it as a bank or brokerage account because it is a financial asset, but it doesn't act like that because of the way the financial institutions, or if you're on an exchange, there's a lot of differences. Like you can't name a beneficiary on your Coinbase or Binance account, whereas you could do that with your bank or brokerage account, and that would solve at least your heirs know that they're inheriting something, but that's just not an option. Similarly, you can't open a trust or executor account with, again, Binance, Kraken, Gemini, any of those exchanges. So your executor can't exactly take over. Your executor will need to know how to transfer the crypto onto essentially his or her own wallet, whether it be a digital paper or hardware, because it's just not an option on any of the exchanges. So it's not a financial product. It is closer to personal property. What I mean by that is, like, let's say you have a Picasso or a baby grand piano or something that's and basically whoever's in possession of it is kind of the owner at that moment. So it is closer to that, although it's not exactly that. So you do have to make sure you're delivering possession of, I guess, however you would get access. So I guess, your seed phrase or your keys. And then there's, of course, the idea that it's sort of like an intellectual property asset, because it boils down to something that can be written down on a piece of paper. So there's all these different ways of thinking about it. Those are different ways of thinking about how to own and how to transfer it upon your death.
If and let's forget about jurisdictions because they're probably different in New York, let alone different countries as well. I have my crypto, my Bitcoin on a Bulgarian exchange, and I unfortunately die, and my benefactors and my estate gets executed. My will gets executed. What happens to that? Is there any recourse? What could my heirs do, my benefactors?
So as far as I can tell, the exchanges are following the banks in terms of what happens with the deceased person's account, in that as long as somebody comes to them with a death certificate and a proof that they are the legal representative of the estate, such as an executor, and you need a piece of paper called letters testamentary, they will release to you. But it's very unclear what that means, released to you, because again, they don't. If you did that with a bank, they would simply open an executor account and say, okay, you're now the manager of this account, or cut you a check for the balance of the account. But you might not want to liquidate. You may not want to convert to fiat. That might not be the intention or the wishes of the person who passed away. So, you need an executor who knows how to set up an address and receive the output or the withdrawal from that Bulgarian exchange.
And just on that, so if you did have Bitcoin, BTC, let's say you had $1 million worth of BTC, when that's distributed to the beneficiaries, is that in BTC or is that in US dollars or?
So it depends on the situation. My advice to any executor out there would be to transfer it. They call it in kind, meaning in Bitcoin and BTC, only because it's such a volatile asset. You don't want to be the one on the hook for liquidating it one day, cutting the check to your heir, and the next day, it pops, and your heir is mad at you. And whether or not it's legitimate, but you're creating a problem, right? Your heir is mad at you that he's left, $100,000 on the table, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. I'm completely out of my depth with all this legalese, I'm afraid, Anthony, which is why we've got you on the show. So again, have a listen to our previous episode, because we actually did go into estate planning quite a bit. And I like some of the problems and the scenarios that you came up with. And we've mentioned that, there are different ways to define Bitcoin. But essentially, from my point of view, and this may not be a legal perspective, whoever has access to those private keys essentially owns the Bitcoin, because they can spend them. Let's go through a couple of scenarios and do some pros and cons. And I know there are a lot of different custody solutions out there, so we're not going to go too much into it, but I wanted to look at three things: paper wallets, hardware wallets, and Bitcoin exchanges. So, I mean, off the top of your head, let's look at a paper wallet. What is it? What are some of the pros and cons with storing your Bitcoin in a paper wallet?
Cool. So paper wallets are essentially where you write down on a piece of paper your private key. And this is I think, 250 character string of, I think, letters and numbers. I don't know exactly. Whoever has that has access to whatever amount of crypto is held in that digital wallet. I shouldn't say digital wallet, in that wallet. So the problems with that, I guess the pros are it's one of the most secure. I mean, as long as you set it up properly, it's supposedly one of the most secure ways of holding your crypto. It's an utterly cold solution. Again, assuming it was generated properly. And it's a little old school. A lot of folks will be more comfortable with knowing that they have this piece of paper that represents, it's almost like a bearer bond. It represents their Bitcoin, right? And it has, sometimes you can print it out with a fancy, it'll look like a stock certificate, and it kind of feels more tangible. I know that doesn't really matter, but psychologically, I think that's going to help a lot of people.
Yeah.
But the drawbacks are that it's extremely fragile. And, if that paper disintegrates, coffee gets spilled on it and a portion of your key is destroyed, you're kind of out of luck. And it's much harder to recover sort of mentally. So when you have a 12 or 24 or however long seed phrase, those are, I believe, all English language words where even if you lose a couple of letters, you might be able to reconstruct, oh, that word is, I'm looking at my TV remote control. So if it's R blank, 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 TE, you might be able to suss out that word was remote, for example, right? But if you just have XYZ156 and a chunk is, blotted out for whatever reason, it's going to be tough to recover that. Yeah. So those are the pros and cons of the paper wallet. Yeah. I mean, have I missed anything? I think you're probably a stronger expert in this area.
Well, I'm asking the questions, Anthony.
Okay.
Yeah, no, you're completely right. And there are also things called metal wallets as well, where you can actually imprint the characters, and so they're a little bit more durable. But yeah.
So I've always wondered about those. Aren't you giving up your keys when you're asking somebody to etch them? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, well, there are actually metal wallets you can do yourselves, so you can actually sort of imprint them onto the metal yourself. But you're right, and also creating a paper wallet too has its own risks as well, because I think one of the paper wallet websites was actually hacked. So when you're generating your paper wallet, guess what? You just gave all your Bitcoins to the hacker who did the website. Wow. And if you're really paranoid and you printed out your paper wallet on a work printer, well, those printers actually have memory and they have hard drives in them, and someone 5 years later might be able to get into that. But yeah, so
Gordon, have you read? Sorry, have you read the Bitcoin billionaires? The Winkle, basically the story of the Winklevosses getting into it.
No, I haven't. No.
So this is from the book, so this is public information. But so when they set up, they did paper wallets, and they bought fresh printers. They had a fresh laptop that was had never been online. And then they, at the end of the whole process, they sledgehammered all the printers and hard drive. Like that's how strong their OPSEC was.
Yeah. I think you have to. I mean, even a laptop, you got stuff that stays in memory. There might be some temporary printer files on the hard drive. When you're dealing in a lot of money, and even that, it's like where did you create the the paper wallet from? Like, what software did you use? Did you use it on what browser and all that kind of stuff? So you can never be too paranoid when it comes to these kind of things. Okay, so we got, I mean, I call them OTG wallets, you know, off the grid, offline wallets, whether it's a paper wallet, metal wallet, that kind of stuff. It's not connected to the internet. You print it once and that's it. But as you said, pretty fragile. And from an estate planning point of view, like, where do you put it? Do you put it in your bookshelf? Do you put it in a bank deposit box? Where do you store it?
So safe deposit boxes are notoriously, you don't want to put, I know people love the idea of leaving their will or their deed or whatever in their safe deposit box, but it's just not a good. So I open safe deposit boxes after people die, and it's just not a good process. You don't want anything super valuable in there, especially something that's going to, you know, if revealed, could be a huge security hole. The contents of your safe deposit box are recorded and sent to the court. You know, I can't imagine why they would actually write down the actual private key, but it is, you know, you have several people seeing what's in the box. You know, you have a process where you have several witnesses when you open the box to make sure nobody, you know, took anything. But I don't know, that just doesn't feel very secure. Yeah.
Oh, me neither. And I mean, who knows who has access to it? Maybe the bank staff, and
right.
So probably not the best idea in the world. Okay, so we've got these OTG wallets with their pros and cons, and remarkably, a lot of the Bitcoin sort of old timers and what we call cypherpunks, they actually go for these offline wallets because that's sort of how hardcore they are. And then we come to hardware wallets. So, what is a hardware wallet, and you know, what is a hardware wallet?
So my understanding. And again, I'm more lawyer than Bitcoin guy. So here's my understanding from that perspective.
Sure.
Is that the hardware wallets are sort of a semi-cold, I guess you would say, solution that bridges the gap between the paper wallet and something that's completely online. So it's usually a very, very small, super simple device that you plug into your computer or you put online for the limited purpose of transacting. However, my understanding is when it's online, it's never actually revealing your private keys or exposing them to the hot connection, but rather an encrypted version of it. So your keys basically never leave this small device, and it's a super simple device, which in theory makes it less vulnerable to malware or hacking, because I think the computer science notion is that the simpler the operating system and the simpler the device, the fewer, you know, points of entry or points of weakness to a potential virus or malware. That's my very high level understanding of what are the, you know, what are the technological reasons why you have a hardware wallet. Yeah.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Complexity is the enemy of security. So that's usually how things work in computer science. And
then it makes your life easier, right? You don't have to write down these 250 digits each time you transact.
And that's really the main advantage. The pro of a hardware wallet is it's super convenient. So you plug in your hardware wallet into your computer, and as Anthony just said, your private keys don't actually leave the hardware wallet. But one of the main things, it's kind of like a password manager. So a lot of people are familiar with OnePass or LastPass, and they're generating passwords. Well, that's basically what a hardware wallet does. It generates passwords and then it stores them on that device. So even if you're running Windows XP and you're riddled with malware and viruses on your computer, in theory, even putting a hardware device into that computer shouldn't actually affect anything. The reality is that a lot of these devices, I wouldn't say have been hacked, but a lot of these devices over time, even though someone has physical access to your device, I'd pretty much say that would be compromised, you know, in maybe a week or two, or however long it takes perhaps a sophisticated hacker to sort of get at it. But yeah, hardware devices are definitely the way to go. Super convenient. You do sacrifice a bit of security. So we noticed with Ledger recently, their devices are safe. So don't worry, if you've got a Ledger, everything's fine. But their marketing database was actually released to the public. So everyone who bought a Ledger, they've got credit card information, name, address, all that kind of stuff. which is kind of dangerous because people know that, you know, you've received a ledger to perhaps your home address. So, and also another thing is that whenever you're checking your ledger and it's trying to get the latest Bitcoin price or checking your wallet, it is actually phoning home through Ledger's servers. So at the very least, Ledger knows how much Bitcoin you've got. So there is a little bit of a privacy concern about that. But with VPNs and other ways, there are sort of ways to mitigate that. But yeah, definitely a hardware device is super secure and also super convenient.
From the estate planning perspective, just to compare and contrast the hardware wallet versus the paper wallet, in order to transfer or gift, let's say, or inherit via paper wallet, your heir needs to somehow get control of where, you know, those private keys, whether it's written on a piece of paper or if it's etched in a metal card, or somehow have that information delivered to them, which is much more difficult with, again, 250 characters, a string of nonsensical characters. But with a hardware wallet, you might be wondering, oh, how do I make sure my heir receives the physical hardware wallet? That's not necessarily required. My understanding is if you are able to figure out a way to deliver your seed phrases to your heirs, they can, even without finding your hardware wallet, reconstruct your or transfer the contents of your hardware wallet to a new device. They, you know, they'll have to buy a new ledger. Hopefully they're smart enough to buy a new one and not buy a used one off eBay or something, right? But as long as we've set it up through the estate plan, a way to get those seed phrases to the heirs or to the executor, there is a mechanism to, you know, figure it out. And again, these are plain language English words, a little bit more easy to work with than, again, a 250 character string of nonsense.
Yeah.
And it would probably be several. I mean, you should probably have several paper wallets, not just all your Bitcoin in one.
Yeah, well, that would probably be a bad idea. Yeah, so that's a really good point, Anthony. So it's kind of like having an ATM card and your PIN. Yeah. So your ATM card is kind of like your hardware wallet. So just because someone has your ATM card doesn't necessarily mean that it can clean you out. They also need your PIN as well. And we actually suggest, for example, that people set up a separate password for their hardware wallet. It's called like a 25th seed. So in the worst case possible, someone actually gets your 24 words. So let's say your hardware wallet got lost, got stolen, or for whatever reason, no one can find it. Someone, as Anthony said, could actually take the 24 words and reconstruct them or restore them onto a brand new hardware wallet and recover it that way. But what happens if someone gets those 24 words? You know, you've left them in your bookshelf, or you've left them lying around, or you quite foolishly, which you shouldn't do, take a screenshot or take a photo of it and upload it to your iCloud or your Dropbox. So on those devices, all of them, you can actually set up a 25th word, which is password. So PSA for that.
So I'm going to push back on that a little bit. I've been looking at the 25th word. So this is where I find it really, it's subjective, but there's a delicate balance between the need for security and increasing the complexity, and therefore increasing the chances that your executor or your heirs will just never figure it out. And you know, we've already put up a situation where they need to figure out these 24 words, which is difficult. You know, I mean, I'm not sure how what the plan is to deliver those to your executor or heir. But if you add on top of that the additional twist that they also need this 20 passphrase, you're potentially creating more risk of catastrophic loss. But I'm not sure how much risk of theft you're reducing it by. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yep.
Yeah. So it's just, it depends. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this whole episode is, it depends, right? How much money you got, how tech savvy you are, how much, you know, whatever. No, that's a really good point. And at the end of the day is, how do you deliver this, whether it's 24 words, whether it's a long private key, whatever, or accounts on an exchange, how do you deliver that to your executor, or how is that in your will? So at the end of the day, that's kind of where we
totally agree.
Okay, and our third, but really good point about that. Our third point is, well, our third, I guess, way to stop Bitcoin is exchanges. So a Bitcoin exchange, it could be a completely regulated exchange like Coinbase in the US. It could be our Bulgarian exchange. Pros and cons of storing your Bitcoin on exchanges, Anthony.
So the pros are it's a much more for new entrants to the cryptocurrency world. It's a much more familiar interface. You have an app, you have a website. You feel like there's an institution there backing up everything you're doing. Like in terms of your Coinbase account or your Binance account, you can recover your password if you lost it. It's all very familiar. The pros, if you die and your crypto is on an exchange, at least a US exchange. I haven't looked at Bulgarian exchanges in particular, but at least with the US ones, yes, there is a process where if your executor shows up with the proper documentation, death certificate, letters of testamentary, they will transact with your executor. Again, I don't know exactly what that means, if they'll cash it out and pay you cash or deliver your crypto to you in kind, but there is a process. It will not disappear into the ether. The cons are that being on exchange, you mentioned Mt. Gox earlier. You just kind of never know. You are putting all your coins in somebody else's basket and hoping that their security is better than what you would do, and you're hoping that they're legit and not just Ponziing it up, basically. And then, of course, philosophically, I mean, the whole decentralized philosophy behind this is to not be on an exchange like that, to not be relying on gatekeepers. So there is that in terms of what you're fighting for with your Bitcoin or what your thought process is.
No, I have this argument all the time, even with people with significant amount of Bitcoin, and they just leave it on exchange because it's convenient, and they'll leave it on a regulated exchange like Binance or Coinbase. They'll never be insolvent. They'll never get hacked. And it's like, well, yeah. I think I said this last time. A bridge that collapses, was probably good the day before, and you just never know. So, I completely agree, and we're definitely all about taking self-custody of your Bitcoin. So before we get into perhaps some best practice and solutions, anything else comparing Bitcoin loss versus theft?
Just to wrap it up, there seems to be an inverse relationship between security and convenience. The most convenient and familiar version of holding through the exchanges, super familiar, nice, slickly designed apps and all that. It's probably on the weaker side of the security spectrum. And then the most secure, with a metal etched private key,
Right.
in your I don't know, safe buried in your backyard. It's pretty inconvenient, but pretty secure.
Exactly. No, I couldn't said it better myself. There's always a trade-off, and there's no one size fits all. I know that's an annoying answer. The answer is sort of, it depends. It also depends on how much money you got. I mean, if we're talking $100 worth of Bitcoin versus, a few $1 million worth of Bitcoin, you're going to have vastly different custody solutions. And it's all about reducing single points of failure. As Anthony said, how do you let your beneficiaries know about your private keys and in your seed phrases, no matter, and people outsmart themselves all the time. So as you said, probably more likely to lose them than you are at getting stolen. And so maybe you want to have duplicates of perhaps some of this stuff for the 24-word seeds. That decreases security, but perhaps less likely for single points of failure.
I want to, before we jump into this next section, I want to frame it with this point of experience of mine. As executor, I see heirs and estates just missing things all the time. And I'm talking about conventional assets like bank accounts or, gold bars or jewelry. Things go missing all the time. And things that the decedent, the person who passed away, was probably thinking, oh yeah, they'll figure out where this is. So if that happens with your, Citibank account, which is very, very, very familiar, I'm just cautioning, it's very likely that you're going to have problems with something more esoteric, such as a paper cryptocurrency wallet.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, so I mean, without giving any advice, because it's hard to give advice, because it's just, there's just, I mean, it really does depends. What would you say as sort of some of the best practices and sort of things that people should be doing?
I think it's a little early to say what our best practices, just because I personally have only, handled a couple dozen of these, but I can tell you what trends I'm seeing and what seems to be making folks comfortable, and hopefully that's helpful to you and listeners. Yeah. So what I've learned from I think her name is Pamela Morgan. She's another attorney who's kind of carved out a niche in this estate planning with crypto space. But she puts a good frame on it in that you really need two plans when you have your cryptocurrency. You have your legal plan, but you need to pair that with a technical plan. So you have your lawyer who, writes up the documents, and if you say, I want to cut out this nephew, but I want to make sure this niece gets this amount of money, that's all part of the legal plan, and making sure the documents reflect that, and making sure that we avoid probate court if that's what you want. That's all part of the legal plan. But then the technical plan is, okay, now that we know who gets what and what you want to avoid and what your goals are, we need to also make sure that, because there's not as much infrastructure, there isn't the automatic beneficiary designation, or the court system is not as well developed for this. We need to figure out, how is this going to happen? How are we going to pass on these seed phrases or shards of seed phrases or private keys? And that's the technical side. And your lawyer needs to be familiar with, at least at a certain minimum level, to make sure that those two things dovetail and sort of work. Yeah.
So if anyone listening out there, you need a legal plan, see Anthony. If you need a technical plan, come and see us at coincompass.com. Shameless plug. I mean, we could talk about this all day and different custody solutions, but it really needs to be individualized for your particular use case. And anything else you want to plug, Anthony? Maybe your website and Twitter, or where are you these days?
Website is anthonyspark.com. It reads anthonyspark.com. That's just a bunch of my writings. A lot of it is mostly traditional probate and estate work, but I am thinking out loud a lot more about the crypto planning. So you'll see that there. And I'm actually I would love to hear more from any of your listeners or viewers. If anyone has a plan that they wanted to kick around or just want to think about, ping me or contact me, and I'm happy to have a chat with you, because I'm learning as we go along, and the more data points I have, the stronger my knowledge will become. So you are helping me by reaching out to me.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, Anthony, for your time, and hopefully we've put a few fires under some rear ends to people who really haven't been thinking about their estate planning. Have got a significant, or even if you've got a little amount of Bitcoin, $100 today could be worth a lot more in 5 years' time. So never too late to get started.
Sure.
Well, thanks again, Anthony. And we will have that cap or t-shirt ready for you next episode.
Thanks for having me, Gordon.
Thanks, Anthony. Cheers.
Thanks for watching or listening. Please visit coincompass.com/free to register to our socials and discover other free content. Subscribing, liking, and following helps this content remain ad-free. Until next time.